Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit is one of the most important and complex works in philosophy. In it, Hegel tries to explain how human consciousness, or awareness, develops and evolves over time. The book explores how our understanding of ourselves and the world around us changes as we go through different stages of thinking, experiencing, and interacting with others. Hegel's main idea is that human consciousness goes through a process of growth, and this process follows a pattern of contradictions and resolutions, which he calls dialectics. Let's break down the main ideas and stages of the book in a simpler way. The preface. How we know things and Hegel's method. In the preface, Hegel talks about how we come to know things and criticizes the way people normally think about knowledge. He argues that most people rely too much on what they experience directly, like common sense or science, which he thinks doesn't give us the full picture. For Hegel, real knowledge comes from understanding the deeper connections and relationships between things, especially the contradictions that appear when we try to understand them. Hegel introduces his unique way of thinking called the dialectical method. In simple terms, it's a process where an idea or thesis meets its contradiction or antithesis, and the two are resolved into something new and better, synthesis. This cycle repeats, pushing our understanding forward. Introduction. The goal of the book and how consciousness develops. The Phenomenology of Spirit aims to trace the journey of human consciousness, showing how our awareness evolves from simple experiences to deeper and more complex understandings of the world. Hegel believes that this development isn't just an individual journey, but one that happens collectively in history. In other words, as history progresses, so does our collective awareness of ourselves and the world. Consciousness. In this section, Hegel describes the different stages of human consciousness, starting with the most basic form and gradually moving toward more advanced understanding. The first is sense certainty. This is the simplest form of knowing. At this stage, we try to understand the world by relying on our immediate senses, what we see, hear, touch, etc. However, Hegel shows that this way of knowing is very limited because our senses only give us brief, changing impressions that don't capture the true nature of things. For example, you might describe something as this or now, but those words are so vague that they don't tell us much. Then comes perception. In this next stage, we try to get a more complete understanding by organizing what we sense into objects with properties like, this is a red apple. This is a step forward because it helps us categorize and make sense of things. When we try to break objects down into their different qualities like size, shape, and color, we struggle to understand how all these qualities fit together into a single object. Next, force and the understanding. Here, consciousness moves beyond just observing individual objects and starts thinking about the forces behind them. Instead of seeing things as isolated objects, we start to realize that everything is connected and influenced by deeper forces or processes. For example, instead of just seeing a tree, we start thinking about the processes, like growth, energy, etc., that make the tree what it is. But even this understanding isn't complete, because we still can't fully explain how these forces and their effects are related. But Hegel points out that this way of thinking also has problems. Then, there is self-consciousness. At this stage, we don't just look at the world outside us, we become aware of ourselves as thinking beings. We realize that we are both the ones perceiving things and part of the world we are perceiving. This leads to a deeper sense of self-awareness. But self-consciousness isn't just about individual awareness. It involves interacting with others and seeking recognition from them. Next, we have the master-slave dialectic. One of the most famous ideas in Hegel's work is the master-slave dialectic. It's about how self-consciousness develops through interactions with others. When two self-conscious beings meet, they both want to be recognized as independent and important. This leads to a struggle for recognition, where one person becomes the master, who dominates, and the other becomes the slave who is subjugated. But there's a twist. The master depends on the slave for recognition and labor, while the slave, through working and adapting, begins to understand the world in a deeper way. Over time, the slave develops a richer self-awareness than the master, who remains dependent on the slave's labor and recognition. This shows how human development often comes through struggle and contradiction. Lastly, we have stoicism, skepticism, and the unhappy consciousness. After the master-slave dialectic, Hegel describes three ways people deal with the contradictions of self-consciousness: stoicism, trying to detach from the world and focus on inner freedom; skepticism, doubting everything and rejecting all claims to knowledge; unhappy consciousness, feeling torn between the limited physical world and a desire for something greater or infinite, like God. This stage reflects a kind of inner conflict or alienation. Reason. Reason is a higher stage where we start to see the unity between ourselves and the world. Instead of feeling alienated, we realize that the world can be understood through rational thinking. We start using reason to explore and explain the world in a systematic way. At this stage, we also look at society and morality, trying to understand how individual freedom can fit with living in a community. Hegel emphasizes that reason isn't just about thinking in isolation, it's about engaging with the world and others in a meaningful way. Spirit. In this stage, Hegel shifts from focusing on individual consciousness to the collective consciousness of society, which he calls spirit. Spirit is the shared awareness and values of a community or culture. For Hegel, true freedom and self-understanding can only be achieved when we see ourselves as part of this larger social and historical context. Ethical life and the state. Hegel argues that real freedom comes from being part of a community where individuals work together for the common good. He calls this ethical life. The highest expression of this is the state, which represents the organized community where individual freedom and universal principles are balanced. Culture and alienation. As people participate in culture through art, religion, politics, etc., they become part of something bigger than themselves. But this also creates a sense of alienation, where individuals might feel disconnected from their personal desires in favor of the larger goals of society. This tension is part of how we develop self-consciousness and freedom. The French Revolution and the Reign of Terror. Hegel reflects on the French Revolution as an example of how the desire for freedom can lead to conflict. The revolution started with the goal of absolute freedom, but it led to the violence and chaos known as the Reign of Terror. This shows how abstract ideas of freedom can clash with real-world conditions, leading to contradictions that need to be resolved. Religion. In the stage of religion, consciousness moves toward understanding itself and the world in terms of a higher power. Hegel sees religion as an important way that people try to grasp the meaning of life and their place in the universe. He describes different types of religious consciousness, from primitive religions to Christianity. Symbolic, classical, and revealed religion. Symbolic religion. Early forms of religion where people use symbols and rituals to connect with the divine. Classical religion. More developed forms, like ancient Greek religion, where gods are represented in human-like forms through art and mythology. Revealed religion. In Christianity, God is seen as both divine and human, particularly in the figure of Christ. Hegel sees this as the highest form of religious consciousness because it represents a unity between the human and divine. The Trinity and the notion of God. Hegel focuses on the Christian idea of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which he sees as a reflection of the dialectical process. Each part of the Trinity represents a different stage of God's self-revelation. For Hegel, this structure is like the stages of consciousness, moving from the individual to the universal and back again. Absolute knowledge. The final stage in Hegel's phenomenology is what he calls absolute knowledge. This is the point where consciousness fully understands itself and the world. At this stage, all the contradictions that consciousness has faced between self and world, individual and society, etc., are resolved. Absolute knowledge is where we see the unity of all things, the idea that everything is interconnected and part of a larger whole. In essence, Hegel's phenomenology is a story about the journey of human consciousness as it struggles with contradictions, learns from them, and moves toward a more complete understanding of itself and the world. It's not just about individual growth, but about the collective progress of humanity, with each stage of history and culture contributing to our understanding of freedom, knowledge, and reality. While it's not possible to summarize such a profound and celebrated work as The Phenomenology of Spirit in just 10 minutes, I hope you found this summary compelling enough to study further and perhaps contemplate your own interpretation of Hegel's ideas. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Jum joibliom gloibi.